Hello, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're jumping once again into Dustfront, and this time I'm going up against the rebels on level 10, the maximum difficulty, with their bases set to max level large. The rebels are a human faction in Dustfront, equipped with solid military power. They don't have any air units, but what they do have are powerful tanks and long-range artillery that can shred your army if you're not prepared. My first match against them was rough. Their early pressure was intense, so I had to narrow down the area of my base and focus on establishing a strong defensive line before expanding. Today, I'll show you how I handled that challenge and how I adapted my strategy against their heavy firepower. So the very first thing I did in this match was narrow down the area of my base. When you're fighting the rebels on level 10 max difficulty, you can't afford to spread out too early. Their tanks and artillery hit hard, and if your buildings are scattered, you'll lose control fast. By keeping my base compact, I was able to establish a solid defensive perimeter before worrying about expansion. I focused on creating a tight, manageable zone where I could place my essential structures, power production, and resource buildings, all within reach of my defensive units. This setup makes it easier to protect everything at once, especially during the early game when the rebels love to send small harassment squads to test your defenses. Once the perimeter was set, I started building my structures slowly and methodically. I didn't rush. Instead, I prioritized stability. I made sure my economy was steady, my production was consistent, and my defenses were always one step ahead of the rebels' attacks. On max difficulty, they build faster than you, so you have to be smart with your timing. Every building you place has to serve a purpose, either boosting your economy, unlocking stronger units, or reinforcing your defensive line. After securing the core of my base, I moved on to creating a proper front defense. This is where infantry becomes extremely important. A lot of players underestimate infantry in Dustfront, but in this situation, they're essential. I positioned my infantry squads at the front of my base, not just to fight, but to increase the sight range of my dreadnought. The dreadnought is powerful, but its vision is limited. It can't shoot what it can't see. So by placing infantry ahead of it, I extended its line of sight, allowing it to fire earlier and react faster to incoming threats. The infantry basically acted as the eyes of my dreadnought, spotting enemy tanks and artillery before they got too close. The dreadnought is powerful, but its vision is limited. It can't shoot what it can't see. So by placing infantry ahead of it, I extended its line of sight, allowing it to fire earlier and react faster to incoming threats. The infantry basically acted as the eyes of my dreadnought, spotting enemy tanks and artillery before they got too close. At the same time, those infantry units served as a buffer, a living shield, absorbing the first wave of damage whenever the rebels launched an attack. This is crucial because rebel tanks hit extremely hard. If they reach your dreadnought or your buildings directly, you're in trouble. But with infantry up front, they soak up the initial shots, giving your heavier units time to fire back and deal real damage. This combination, a compact base, slow but steady building, and a layered front defense with infantry supporting the dreadnought, created a strong defensive foundation. It allowed me to survive the early pressure, stabilize my economy, and eventually push back against the rebels' heavy armor and long-range artillery. From there, the match becomes much more manageable. Once your defenses are solid and your dreadnought has proper vision and protection, you can start expanding, producing more units, and preparing your counterattack. The key is surviving that early phase, and this strategy gives you the breathing room you need to do exactly that. So I slowly worked my way toward winning this match. While I was defending my main base, I actually moved some of my other units to the right side of the map. The goal was to flank the enemy and force the rebels to divide their attack forces. When their units split up, it becomes much easier to manage their pressure. While my main base held the line, that small flanking group kept creeping forward, taking out isolated units and applying constant counter-pressure. It wasn't a fast push, it was slow, steady, and calculated. But that's exactly what you need against the rebels on max difficulty. Once I finally destroyed their first base, that opened up the entire right side of the map. I immediately built new structures there and continued expanding outward. From that point on, the momentum shifted. With more space, more resources, and more production buildings, I was able to push harder and eventually secure the win. This gameplay is pretty long, so I'm going to leave you to watch the full match and enjoy how the strategy unfolds. If you have any comments, insights, or suggestions, feel free to drop them below. I always read them. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Строительство завершено. инициировано. Ее не потеряли. Строительство инициировано. Обнаружен конфликт. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Юнит потерян. Обнаружен конфликт. Строительство инициировано. Строительство завершено. Строительство инициировано. Строительство инициировано. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Подготовка. Подготовка. Строительство инициировано. Строительство инициировано. Строительство инициировано. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Строительство инициировано. Строительство инициировано. Строительство инициировано. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено. Строительство завершено.